Previously in 717_17, we were celebrating victories for improvements that were being done with alignment and orientation. However, internally I knew that there was much work to be done, and we were still working quite hard on getting orientation solved in an adequate manner. So when it comes to orientation, normally something called local is the default, which we can see here. Whenever you're using local, it will just orient the shapes according to what is set locally. In fact, if I rotate it, I'm still able to draw on this shape locally. This is basically the meaning of local for us. Whenever it comes to Boxcutter, I'll reset its location. If I were to select this point and press J to put a point in between, like a lightning bolt, and enable wireframe, we can now jump over to nearest edge. And for this, I have snap dots enabled, which means that if I hold control, I now see snap dots. And if I were to draw based off of this dot, we see that I'm now able to draw based off of this middle edge. And this is one of the benefits of our orientation system that we've been working on. In fact, you can press Shift V to bring up your orientation helper anytime in order to override the type of orientation that's being used. For example, I could go back to local, and if I jump off this dot, we see that I'm now back local with this object. However, nearest is one of my favorites. So we will just start with nearest, and we'll create this cut, perform a bevel, and that's the cut. And if I were to start with this edge, because this edge is nearby, of course I will be orienting to this edge as well. So orientation's always been a bit of a thing. However, it's also been a bit of a mystery that I've wanted to elaborate on and make a little more clear for users. So let's talk about where this system breaks down. Let's change this back to local. We talked about dots. We talked about how you can just jump off of dots in order to just put shapes in the center of things. I mean, I didn't jump off that dot right, but here I am using these dots in order to begin jumping off. Of course, holding Alt in order to draw from to draw from center. However, in the event that you want to draw in a way that's not constrained to corner, you could always press period, and period will allow you to draw a center drawn box, and then you can just use Alt to modify it and use it as a rectangle like you see me doing here. However, we'll just use it as a box. If we were to take this box and press R and rotate it, this box's world has been turned upside down. And what this means is that if we were to use local, it works fine with orientation, but if we use dots, it does not work fine. If we were to press Shift V and we go to nearest edge, we will try to jump off of this edge, and we see that this is completely wrong and it's disastrous and it's not going to work out. And if we go with this edge, we see this also the same situation. If I zoom back and I take this cube up and out into space, R twice, just to rotate a whole bunch, just really getting jiggy with it, we see that things are just not what they seem, and every system just breaks down in a very ugly fashion. And this is one of the first things that we were discussing the moment that the release was over. It's like, we gotta solve this ish immediately, guys. In fact, we gotta solve this good. We gotta solve it hard. We gotta solve it for good. We gotta solve this for good. And so that was the theme of this release. So now, minimizing this, we're back in Boxcutter. And we were talking previously about how you have local, nearest, and longest as your orient methods, and not being aware of these can result in a rather bad time. So if you're not aware, just keep it under local. Just keep it simple. However, if you're watching this video, you're about to become an advanced user. So we'll do the same thing. We'll select our cube. We'll select each of these points, press J just to put a point between. And if we hold Control and we hover over it, we see that we're able to draw, of course, locally. We should expect local. One of the contemplations I had was adding local somewhere in the top bar to be more indicative of the particular state. However, we'll have to come back for that. I don't want to trash the top bar without giving it a bit of deep thought. So let's just press Shift V and use our orientation helper to turn on nearest edge. And here we are able to use our nearest edge in order to extrude, and we also see that the auto extrude limiter will grab you, and that's just a thing now. If it becomes a problem, we can add, of course, parameters to turn it off. However, over the course of testing, we found that it did more harm than good, and we couldn't actually run into a whole lot of situations that justified its removal or even its mitigation. So continuing on, so now we're oriented to this, and that's all stuff that I showed you previously. So let's just take this cube, double R, rotate it twice. Nearest is now over here. let's just begin doing what we were doing. So we see that orientation is still working fine. And this is actually what this particular release was all about. We see that this one did not work fine. So I wonder what's going on there. Let's just open this up and check what we have. We could jump to local, which will allow us to perform the cut. However, I'm of the opinion that nearest edge actually should have performed the orientation proper. So this is something that we can actually come back to and discuss when it comes to grid. However, let's actually change this over to longest edge and attempt to draw the shape. And we see that now it's been drawn previously. There was previously a video that I put up called Box Corner Study that was just me cutting the corner of a box, playing with all the orientation modes. And the point of that video was actually to come to the conclusions that we're talking about here today about what each orientation method equals to us and what we can do to improve it and how it falls short and what we can do to make it more clear what you're oriented to. Because right now you see me cutting, I'm cutting kind of blind. I'm able to make these cuts work even at this strange orientation, but I'm not truly aware of what my orientation is being set to until I begin drawing the shape. In fact, here I'm drawing the shape. I didn't know where it was going to orient. I figured it would have oriented to this line that I'm nearby, but unless I press Shift V and I turn on nearest edge, that's not going to be the case. Now that's nearest edge, but if I draw over here, still using nearest edge. I draw over here, no longer using nearest edge, but if I draw over here, also not using the nearest edge that I would have been anticipating using. In fact, I have to be somewhere kind of close to this particular piece in order to get the orientation that I desire. And this is actually where orientation still breaks down, but we have done a lot of work towards improving it for this particular update. So I'm just going to take this shape. I was going to say take this tape. We'll just take this shape, bring it up in space, rotate it. And the reason that I'm doing all this rotating and transforming is because this is how I've been testing it. Every time we do an update internally, the first thing I do is show them me taking this shape up in space and cutting it in the most transform situation just to show exactly what it is that we're aiming to solve. So here I'll press D, change over to box, and we're drawing, I guess, using either longest edge or local right now. And we don't even want to cut down that deep, and I don't want to cut that edge out because we still need it for the testing that we're doing. So if I press Shift V, we can change this to nearest edge, which actually should have picked up this nearest edge. And we see that, you know, there's something off with our operation here. In fact, Shift V again, change this to longest edge, and now we're able to play off of this. So there's always been this small guessing game whenever it comes to understanding if you're able to exactly extrude in this, or if you're able to exactly orient to this particular edge, or if it's going to grab the next edge. The calculation system has always been a little bit more random, so our work has been to try to bring a little bit more sanity to it. So the purpose of this was to talk about how there's been orientation improvements, but with that we can now move on to the next section talking about grid improvements.